There's no denying that fossil-based hydrocarbons, in the form of oil, natural gas, and even coal, have allowed humanity to reach heights previously thought unimaginable. They've driven civilization from an agrarian society to an interconnected world, and helped drive nations forward while raising the quality of life for people all over the globe. One of the main contributions of fossil fuels has been empowering the engines of planes, trains, and automobiles through gasoline, diesel, and other liquid fuels. These substances make up the majority of the over 4 trillion liters per year of liquid fuels consumed worldwide, and that number is only projected to grow. However, despite their incredible track record and efficiency as a fuel source, fossil fuels present some undeniable disadvantages, from negative environmental impacts to potential supply chain issues to the limited nature of natural resources that inevitably lead to higher and higher prices as oil and gas reserves in the ground dwindle. This could occur even over the course of the next couple of decades, until the cost eventually outweighs the benefits. In addition, recent events such as the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the war in the Middle East have highlighted the need for nations to achieve energy sovereignty and be less dependent on potentially fragile supply chains and unforeseen geopolitical events. This conundrum leads to the question of today's video. Is there a way to create a sustainable alternative to fossil-based hydrocarbons synthetically, and deploy this alternative at scale across industries in a way that makes economic sense for decades and centuries to come? To answer this question, we're going to consult with industry experts who are working to transmute heat and water into molecularly pure liquid hydrocarbon fuels, along with diving into the science, history, and market outlook for synthetic fuel. Is this a green energy fantasy, or is there a real market here that could potentially change the trajectory of fuel forever? Let's find out. Synthetic fuel is typically a liquid or gaseous hydrocarbon made from syngas, a mix of carbon monoxide and hydrogen derived from feedstocks like coal, natural gas, biomass, or at its cleanest, captured CO2 and renewable hydrogen. While many people believe the synthetic fuel market is a new initiative, it was actually first discovered and employed successfully in the early 1900s through a method known as the Bergius process, created by German chemist Friedrich Bergius. This was a direct coal liquefaction method that involved hydrogenating coal under high pressures and temperatures with catalysts like tungsten or nickel sulfides to produce liquid hydrocarbons. The Fischer-Tropsch process followed, using syngas along with heat, pressure, and catalysts such as cobalt and iron to produce liquid hydrocarbons that are then refined into gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel that can be dropped into engines and used without modification. This process played a major role in powering the German war machine during World War II, allowing their planes, tanks, and other vehicles to be fueled when oil was in short supply. Since then, the synthetic fuel industry has advanced tremendously, with a variety of different manufacturing processes and products, each with their own unique characteristics. Gas-to-liquids technologies became commercially viable in the 1990s by transforming natural gas into cleaner burning synthetic liquids. The discovery and production of renewable diesel fuels occurred around the same time. These biofuels were produced from plant oils and could be used directly in existing diesel engines. Together, these earlier synthetic fuels demonstrated that liquid fuels could be made from non-traditional sources and laid the essential scientific groundwork that allowed today's more sustainable options to flourish. The new generation of sustainable and electro fuels, which gained momentum in the 2010s, primarily includes 3 key categories. First is green hydrogen, produced by splitting water through electrolysis powered entirely by renewable energy. Second are advanced biofuels, created from biomass feedstocks such as sawdust, switchgrass, and wheat straw to deliver a lower carbon replacement for conventional gasoline and diesel. Third are power-to-liquid e-fuels, also known as electrofuels. These e-fuels are synthetic versions of gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel, formed by combining captured carbon dioxide with green hydrogen in a process that can achieve near carbon neutral emissions when produced with renewables. At the moment, e-fuels have arguably the most promise for larger scale commercial adoption. Why, you may ask? Because the other options are either inefficient, as is the case with green hydrogen, with 50 to 80% of the original renewable energy used to create it lost across the value chain, from production to utilization, or lacking adequate inputs as with biofuels that do not have the feedstock availability to substitute away from even 1% of global fossil fuel consumption. Here's Dr. Jack Williams, research fellow for Cambridge University, who designed and operated synthetic fuel reactors with energy giant Shell.
The fuel itself is very, very clean and very pure. There's not much you need to do to the ingredients. The ingredients are basically just water and CO2. Biofuels, it's a very complex mix. There's a lot of separation problems involved, high capex, a lot of purification issues. And e-fuels are drop-in, meaning they work in modern combustion engines. There'd be no infrastructure overhaul required. They can go right into existing jet engines. And their production is far less intensive than that of biofuels. You know, as I said, it requires 10 to 20 tons less land area. You're not constrained for scale up because there's a lot of water and there's a lot of CO2. So all of the kind of problems associated with biofuels you don't really have with e-fuels. The problem with e-fuels at the moment is it's expensive, but that's what the technological drivers are doing. They're bringing down the cost. And when the cost comes low enough, then it's a clear winner over hydrogen and biofuels.
As the synthetic fuel industry has evolved, the goal is no longer to simply be a replacement for fossil-based hydrocarbons, but to outperform them. Petroleum contains heavy metals and sulfur contaminants, leading not only to harmful environmental emissions, but certain performance issues as well. With modern synthetic fuel, these impurities can be captured during synthesis, resulting in ultra-clean fuels that burn more efficiently, with superior thermal stability. The purity of synthetic fuels can also extend engine life by minimizing wear from contaminants, and of course, because it burns cleaner, it generates fewer pollutants and has less of a negative impact on the environment. Now that we have a handle on where synthetic fuels started and how they've evolved, let's dive into how they're used in today's economy. Although there are currently no options to fill up your car at the pump with synthetic fuels, they are being used across a variety of industries, with governments backing the sector through various subsidies, initiatives, and mandates. In the transportation sector, synthetic fuels are making a real impact on heavy haul operations, substituting as cleaner alternatives for traditional gasoline and diesel from fossil sources. E-gasoline and synthetic diesel power vehicles without engine modifications, reducing emissions in long-haul trucking and freight. And in Europe and the US, biofuels like HVO 100, produced from hydro-treated vegetable oil, are fueling some commercial fleets. Meanwhile, China hit a milestone in 2026, ramping up renewable fuel capacity by over 1 billion gallons in an effort to support domestic transport decarbonization. The maritime industry is also making use of synthetic fuel, specifically e-methanol, e-methane, and e-ammonia, to fuel container ships, tankers, and cargo vessels. Further adoption is being driven by the International Maritime Organization's emission targets under its 2023 greenhouse gas strategy, targeting net zero by 2050, with interim goals of 20 to 30% reductions by 2030 and 70 to 80% reductions by 2040. In heavy industry, synthetic fuels provide heat for processes like steel making, cement production, and chemical manufacturing. E-fuels are being implemented to decarbonize high-temperature applications, with carbon capture integration achieving over 90% emission reductions in some cases. Global initiatives include the European Union's Renewable Energy Directive, which mandates 42% renewable energy in industry by 2030, and the Hydrogen Hubs program in the US, which grants $7 billion for regional hubs producing clean hydrogen for synthetic fuels in manufacturing. Synthetic fuels have a long history in the defense sector, as mentioned near the top of the show in regards to Germany's widespread use of them during World War II, and they continue to be used in modern military applications. Highlights include the US Air Force's 2007 certification of Fischer-Tropsch blends for B-52 bombers, followed by full fleet certification in 2011, and NATO testing synthetic fuel in vehicles and aircraft for sustainability and performance, with an eye to e-fuels as part of the initiative to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Perhaps the most intriguing sector when it comes to e-fuels is commercial aviation, and it's also one of the most promising in terms of government subsidies and mandates advancing adoption in the years ahead. Here's Dan Sutton, CEO of synthetic fuel company Syntholine, to explain.
We don't really understand any other mechanism to be able to fly long-haul flights or at the pace that jet aviation takes without the use of very energy-dense fuels. Now, these energy-dense fuels have externalities that governments, policymakers, airlines themselves have acknowledged. They have a disproportionately high emissions profile that's not just CO2, but also things like copper, cadmium, lead, nitrogen oxides, sulfur oxides that disproportionately contribute to greenhouse gases. Another externality that we're witnessing right now in the context of conflicted supply chains is they're also only reliant on fossil inputs. We don't really know how to produce these fuels economically competitively, as well as at the same energy densities that we need for commercial and military aviation without those fossil inputs. And so there's been new policy measures, mandates, compliance targets that have been implemented to use a new kind of hydrocarbon fuel, sustainable aviation fuel, and in our case, particularly synthetic aviation fuel, to be able to meet emissions reductions mandates. But I think it's interesting that if we can envision the future of this fuel being produced increasingly cost competitively, it can also represent a strategic hedge against potential fossil fuel supply chain conflict and those price spikes, volatility, as we see these supply chains occasionally have the tendency to be constrained.
Now, despite all of this progress, the industry has a long way to go. While everything discussed here are promising developments, synthetic fuel use worldwide remains at a paltry sub 1% of total liquid fuels consumption across all sectors. So now that we know where the synthetic fuel market started and where it stands today, how far can it truly go in the years ahead? There is no doubt that the major barrier to entry for synthetic fuels right now is the cost. E-fuels are currently a whopping 7 to 10 times more expensive to produce than fossil-based equivalents on a market price basis, although costs are projected to fall as production is scaled up. Though not yet cost competitive, policy incentives and advancements in the technology used to produce synthetic fuel means that gap is expected to close and ultimately to reach a stage where large-scale commercial adoption is not only possible, but profitable. Policy and regulatory drivers are becoming a catalyzing force behind the expansion of the e-fuels market. In the European Union, the Refuel EU Aviation Initiative requires progressive blending of synthetic kerosene for all commercial airlines operating in EU airports. It starts from 2% in 2025 and increases to 70% by 2050. This initiative, along with the EU's €2 billion subsidy for sustainable aviation fuels, could be a game changer for the industry. In the US, the Inflation Reduction Act grants tax credits and loan guarantees for green hydrogen and carbon capture, and the Clean Fuel Production Credit provides up to $1 per gallon or $1.75 per gallon for sustainable aviation fuel for fuels that meet strict life cycle greenhouse gas reduction thresholds, directly benefiting e-fuel projects and reducing capital risks. Other initiatives include Australia launching the Cleaner Fuels Program, which provides 10 years of production subsidies for sustainable aviation fuels and renewable diesel to the tune of over $1 billion. Singapore mandating all flights departing Changi Airport to use at least 1% SAF. India targeting a 1% SAF blend by 2027 for international flights, and many more. These initiatives, along with the continued push for cleaner and more efficient energy sources globally, has taken the investment landscape by storm, as capital flows into the sector to drive innovation and raise profit margins. Annual capital expenditure in synthetic fuels reached approximately $25 billion in 2025 and is projected to quadruple to $100 billion by 2030 to meet national and corporate pledges for decarbonization. Broader trends show major investment firms, energy companies, and industry giants pouring billions into large-scale plants. Notable milestones include HIF Global's $6 billion facility in Texas, set to produce 200,000 tons of e-fuels annually from 2027. The European Investment Bank committing a €40 million venture debt loan in 2025 to Ineritech for Europe's largest e-fuel production plant in Germany. Alternative investment firm Prime Capital AG becoming a key shareholder in Norsk e-Fuel, a Norwegian company developing e-fuel production facilities powered by renewables, and the list goes on. Because renewable energy is a vital input to the manufacturing process, the majority of the current inflated price tag on producing e-fuels is dominated by renewable energy generation costs, with some estimates placing it at around 70% of total expenditures. Wind and solar as inputs can also be incredibly inefficient, as they are intermittent energy sources that require environmental conditions to be ideal to operate at peak capacity. This makes geothermal energy an attractive alternative as a 100% green energy source that can provide more reliable and cost-effective energy generation. In fact, in a study conducted by the Idaho National Laboratory, high-temperature steam, similar to that emitted by geothermal sources, was found to dramatically increase efficiency and decrease costs in the production of clean hydrogen, one of the key inputs in modern e-fuels manufacturing.
Geothermal is abundant, completely abundant, continuous, it's on all the time, and it has a capacity factor of about 90%. And the thing about geothermal is it's a fluid that is very, very hot. So you can make steam out of it that drives turbines that produce electricity, but you can also use that heat in your process. And so what you can do is you could combine geothermal heat with processes that require a large amount of heat. For example, a solid oxide electrolyzer, which can make hydrogen from steam. The problem, SOECs use about 1/3 less energy per kilogram of hydrogen compared to low temperature electrolyzers, which are the standard at the moment, PEM and alkaline. But the problem is the feed is steam at high temperature and pressure. So without available heat, you have to make that steam, which requires energy. But geothermal can produce that steam at exactly the right temperature and pressure for feed to, for example, this high temperature electrolyzer. So essentially you're getting the feed for no cost, essentially no cost, and essentially no energy input. And what that means is that these really efficient pieces of equipment, the efficiency directly translates into levelized cost of hydrogen, into a very reduced cost of hydrogen. Whereas if you didn't have an abundant heat source like geothermal, you wouldn't be able to get that cost reduction directly from the efficiency gain. So that's really the key benefit of geothermal. It's continuous, abundant, and reliable.
As we can see, the synthetic fuel industry appears to have a vibrant future ahead of it, although it does face many challenges. Despite all of these developments behind the sector, one important thing to note is that fossil-based hydrocarbons aren't going away anytime soon. And the suggestion of this documentary is not that synthetic fuels need to completely replace fossil fuels, but rather that the world needs a variety of energy sources, and synthetic fuels are one possible avenue of diversification. Will technological innovation, national and corporate initiatives, and a growing trend of increasing investment inflows be enough to push e-fuels over the finish line and into a world where we're all filling our tanks with a cleaner, more efficient fuel? Time will tell, but as with all innovations, human ingenuity and persistence are driving factors that can't be underestimated as we strive for energy sovereignty and a more certain future in increasingly uncertain times.